Hello. So this week we talked about Thomas Mapes and his views of immoral sex. And he believes that immoral sex is equivalent to using someone sexually by violating the categorical imperative. And by this we mean disrespecting someone's autonomy and either disregarding or manipulating their informed voluntary consent. And he believes that we do this through two very important ways, the first being deception and the second being coercion. Now, deception violates the informed aspect of informed voluntary consent, and this also happens through one of two ways. The first being outright lying about information. An example of this would be someone telling their potential sexual partner that they are not married when in fact they are married, but they tell them this information to influence their decision to consent. The second would be withholding information. And an example of this would be someone failing to tell their potential partner that they recently had an STI diagnosis. In both of these cases, the person is being sexually used through deception. Now, coercion is a lot more complex. This really violates the voluntary aspect of informed voluntary consent, and there's two different categories of coercion. The first is a current coercion, and this uses physical force and obliterates or disregards consent entirely. For example, forcible rape would fall under this category, and also like forcible sexual assault and other physical nature sexual interactions. Now we have dispositional coercion on the other hand, and this one's a bit more complex. This one appears to give the person a choice, but their choice is extremely influenced and limited by outside circumstances, and that breaks down into threats and offers. Now, threats, they leave the person in a worse position than they were beforehand if they choose to not comply. So, an example of a threat would be someone telling someone else, if you don't choose to sleep with me, then I'm going to ruin your reputation with all of these awful rumors. So, blackmail would fall under the threat area of dispositional coercion. Now, offers, on the other hand, they don't leave the person in a worse position upon noncompliance. But choosing to comply may provide a potential benefit. So, an example of this would be someone saying, hey, if you choose to sleep with me, I'll take you on an extravagant vacation. If they choose not to, they wouldn't have gone on the vacation. They won't get to go on the vacation, but they wouldn't have gone on the vacation anyway. So they're not in a worse position than before, but they could potentially get a benefit out of this proposal. Now, Mapes talks about two special cases that toe the line between being threats and being offers, but they still fall under this umbrella of coercion. The first being someone using their authority status to influence someone else's decision to consent to sexual interactions. An example of this would be a professor telling their student, I'm only going to give you an A in the class if you choose to sleep with me. Now, it seems like the person has a choice here, but they don't really, because there are unthinkable consequences that come from this situation. Will the professor retaliate upon noncompliance? Can the student handle going to class every day and seeing this professor? So that's one of those special cases that Mapes talks about. Now, the other one is when someone abuses someone else's desperate need or desperate situation. I think the book gives the example where there's Mr. Troubled and Miss Opportunistic. Mr. Troubled is getting ready to lose his house and he has three kids that he's struggling to feed. And Miss Opportunistic has asked Mr. Troubled for sexual interactions multiple times and he said no. But when she learns about his situation, she says, hey, I'll pay your mortgage and help you feed your kids if you choose to have sex with me. It seems like he has a choice in that situation, but his circumstances really influence and limit his decision here. If he doesn't choose to do that with her, he might lose his house, his kids might go hungry. So that's another way that someone can abuse someone's situation and use that to influence their decision to consent. Now, do I agree with Mapes's views? I think that informed voluntary consent and respecting autonomy are very important aspects of moral sex, but I do not think that that is enough. So I think this argument disregards the sex that is consensual but still immoral nonetheless. An example of this would be infidelity. So we have a man who has a wife and a woman who has a husband. They consent to sleeping with each other and cheating on their partners. By Mapes's terms, this is moral sex because they consented, but is it actually moral? They cheated on their partners. I would argue that it's not. So there are third parties who can get hurt in these situations that cause it to no longer be moral sex. It makes it immoral. And I have my own personal story of this that really brought me to this conclusion. So when I was in high school, I had a boyfriend that I dated for 4 years. And I also simultaneously had a best friend who like lived with me for a while in high school. Well, we broke up when I was a senior, and come to find out later on, my best friend was secretly sleeping with this now ex-boyfriend behind my back. And although they were consenting to each other and technically moral by Mapes's standpoint, it wasn't moral because it was a best friend stabbing her best friend in the back. So I don't agree that consent is enough. I think that you have to take into consideration potential third parties who can get hurt in those types of situations. But yes, thank you so much for listening, and I can't wait to hear your response.